I'm joined now by Dr. Darlington Tshuma, who's a research fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionale Mediterranean, Middle East and Africa program, and as well as a postdoctoral researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs at UNISA. Dr. Tshuma, thank you so much for joining us. Just speaking of, let's start with the funding as well. Just listening to that package earlier on, talking about the indebtedness of developing countries as well, reforming the financial structures as well of the global system. How much pressure will there be to find those kinds of solutions in the summit?
Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to your viewers. So the debt crisis is a very, I think, big problem in Africa particularly, but also predominantly in the global south. And I think the focus really will be on trying to reform the global financial architecture, because it's clear from where we stand that it's dysfunctional. It was designed for post-war Europe, and today the world is facing complex challenges from climate change, wars, and conflicts almost everywhere. So the current financial architecture that we have is not fit for purpose, and I think here South Africa will probably want to really stress the need for global financial reform. And if you look at the fact that I think about 3.3 billion people live in countries that spend more on debt servicing than on health and education and other social protection. So this is quite a big problem. So I hope that the focus really will be on this, but then equally other areas like food security, climate change, and the just energy transition.
And also that reform as well is needed speedily as well, but also the picture has changed from the historical picture too. In one of your latest articles, you write that 30 years ago, this picture would have been different, saying G7 countries constituted nearly 70% of the global economy. Now, if you contrast that to 2024, and you bring into the fore things like BRICS as well, who've been added to the bloc, and now they have about 35% of the world's GDP. With the strengthening of the global south as well, will that force the talks to have to actually happen this time? Because these talks have been in the making, but really proper action hasn't been seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the need for financial reform is not an entirely new thing. I think it's like goes back as far as the early 2000s, but there's certainly been a sort of like resistance from your established and major global powers. But seeing the shifts that are happening globally, I think there's a recognition that this needs to happen. And even some established powers, Italy, for example, is the president of the G7, I think, and the conversation there have also been going, or at least leading towards, sort of like opening up to the need for financial...
And Dr. Tshuma, sorry to cut you off there, I just want to speak to the visuals that our viewers are seeing right now on their screens. We've got, former president of the US, still current president, Joe Biden, who's just arrived as well at the summit. There's been also a lot of talk about the new US president-elect Donald Trump and what his new return to that White House will mean for not only the G20 countries, but all the other partners as well. What would you say about, seeing world leaders like this? We have Joe Biden, his role there, the significance of it as well, and the message that that's sending.
Like walk a very tightrope, and I think it'll be particularly important for South Africa to demonstrate its non-aligned position, and really not get caught up in these geopolitical tensions that are happening, but really try and put forward an African agenda, a global South agenda, which anchors on three fundamental issues, whether we're talking about global financial reform, climate change, and just energy transition, and also food systems transformation. If you look, for example, today, I think there are about 700 or 800 million people that don't have access to electricity, and that's a big problem. And even if we're talking about just energy transition, I think it's important to have the conversation around just energy transition. But then I think the most important message to talk about would be energy access. How do we make sure that, the 800 million or so people that don't have access have, don't have access to electricity, actually have access to electricity. So this is I think the conversations that that South Africa should be bringing or will be bringing to the fore, and sort of like try and walk carefully and be very. I mean, South Africa is quite experienced in this stuff, so I don't see them getting bogged down by this geopolitical tension. I see South Africa playing a balancing act, because in the end, if this presidency is going to be impactful, it needs to get the buy-in of like the global powers, but also increasingly like push the agenda of the global South and African countries in particular.
Dr. Tshuma, thank you so much for your insights on this very important occasion that's taking place in Brazil.